Yarrow Grayson pushed open the glass doors of the gym, expecting nothing more than a workout. What he didn't expect was the woman standing behind the front desk, her bright smile making the sterile, fluorescent-lit space feel unexpectedly warm. "Hey there." "First time here?" she asked, her voice smooth and inviting. Yarrow blinked, caught off guard. He'd been to countless high-end gyms, most of which had receptionists who barely looked up from their computers. But this woman, she was different. Friendly, genuine. No forced customer service voice, just pure warmth. "Yeah," he replied, clearing his throat. "Thought I'd try something new." "Well, welcome to Summit Fitness," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Calla Jensen." Yarrow hesitated for a second before shaking her hand, her grip firm yet soft. "Yarrow, nice to meet you, Yarrow," she glanced at the system in front of her. "Looks like you signed up for a trial membership. Good choice. This place is great." He wasn't convinced yet, but he found himself nodding anyway. Maybe it had less to do with the gym and more to do with the way she was looking at him, like he was just another guy and not a millionaire accustomed to people treating him differently once they figured out who he was. "Let me show you around," she offered, stepping from behind the desk. Yarrow followed her through the gym, surprised by how easily she chatted. Most people were intimidated by him, his height, his presence, his wealth that was impossible to hide even in the simplest of outfits. But Calla, she didn't seem fazed at all. "So, what made you decide to switch up your routine?" she asked over her shoulder. He debated telling her the truth, that he was tired of the exclusive, impersonal gyms he usually went to, where everyone was either a wealthy executive or an influencer angling for a sponsorship deal. Instead, he went with, "Just wanted a change." She nodded like that was a perfectly acceptable answer. "Well, I think you'll like it here. No pressure, no judgment, just people trying to be better versions of themselves." Something about the way she said it made him glance at her. "Is that why you work here?" A small laugh escaped her. "Partly. I love fitness, but more than that, I love helping people feel comfortable in a place that can be intimidating." She stopped near a row of treadmills and gestured around. "A gym should be a place where you feel good, not where you feel like you have to prove something." Yarrow studied her, sensing there was more to her words than she let on. "You sound like you know that from experience." She hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah. I used to be really self-conscious about working out. But then I realized it wasn't about looking a certain way, it was about feeling strong, inside and out." That struck something deep in him. Strength had always been a currency in his world, but he'd never thought about it in the way she described. "I like that," he admitted. Calla smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good. Now, do you want me to help you get started, or do you prefer figuring things out on your own?" He knew how to work out. He didn't need help. But for some reason, Yarrow found himself saying, "I wouldn't mind some pointers." She grinned. "All right, let's do this." For the next hour, she guided him through different exercises, correcting his form without making it feel like criticism, pushing him just enough to make him work harder. She was good at this, encouraging, knowledgeable, and completely unaware of the way his pulse picked up whenever she leaned in to adjust his stance. By the time they finished, he wasn't sure if his heart was pounding from exertion or from the way she laughed so easily, the sound light and infectious. "You did great," she said, handing him a towel. "See, not so bad, right?" He took it, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I'll admit I didn't hate it," she laughed. "That's high praise, so will I see you again?" Yarrow should have said he wasn't sure, that he was just testing the place out, but instead he found himself saying, "Yeah. I think you will." As he left the gym, he realized something unsettling. He hadn't just enjoyed the workout, he'd enjoyed her, and that was dangerous. Because Yarrow Grayson didn't do distractions, but as he stepped outside, he knew one thing for certain. Calla Jensen was already becoming one. Yarrow found himself returning to Summit Fitness the next day, an unfamiliar anticipation settling in his chest as he walked through the glass doors. He wasn't the type to get attached to places or people, but something about this gym, or more specifically, someone in it, had drawn him back. Calla was at the front desk again, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She looked up as he approached, her smile immediate and genuine. "Back so soon," she teased. I must have done a great job convincing you. He leaned against the counter, holding her gaze. Or maybe I just like a challenge, she laughed, the sound warm and easy. Then you're in the right place. Yarrow wasn't used to this banter that wasn't calculated, interactions that weren't laced with underlying motives. He was surrounded by people who either wanted something from him or were too intimidated to treat him normally. Calla, on the other hand, seemed completely unaffected by who he was. She stepped out from behind the desk, tossing a towel over her shoulder. Are you planning to do the same workout as yesterday, or are you up for trying something new? He wasn't sure if she was talking about exercise or something else entirely, but he found himself saying, let's switch it up. She led him toward the free weights, adjusting the equipment without hesitation. He watched her move, noticing the way she carried herself confident, capable, completely in her element. You train a lot of people here, he asked as she positioned the dumbbells. Not officially, she admitted, but I help out when I can. Some people get nervous about lifting weights, especially if they're new to it. I like making it less intimidating. He lifted the weights, testing their resistance. You like helping people? She gave a small shrug. I like seeing people realize they're stronger than they think. Something about the way she said it made him pause. There was depth in those words, a weight that hinted at something personal, but before he could ask, she clapped her hands together. All right, let's see what you've got. He followed her guidance, pushing himself harder than usual, though he wasn't sure if it was because of her encouragement or the way she watched him with quiet focus. Either way, by the time he finished, his muscles burned in a way that felt satisfying rather than punishing. Not bad, she said as he set the weights down. I think you might even be enjoying this, he exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Maybe, she grinned. You know, most people don't come back 2 days in a row after a trial session. That usually means they're hooked. He met her gaze. Maybe I am. Something flickered across her face, but before he could decipher it, she reached for a water bottle and tossed it to him. Hydrate, she ordered. You still have to make it through the rest of your day. He caught the bottle, twisting off the cap. And what about you? What's your day look like after this? She leaned against the nearby rack, considering. Work, then probably a run. Maybe I'll grab dinner with my roommate if she's not working late. The simplicity of her answer caught him off guard. He was used to people listing off high-powered meetings, exclusive events, and plans that revolved around status. Calla's life, by contrast, sounded refreshingly real. You run after working here all day, she shrugged. It clears my head. He took a sip of water, watching her. You don't strike me as someone who needs to clear their head. She tilted her head, a knowing look in her eyes. Everyone does in their own way. What about you? What do you do when you need to reset? He hesitated. He'd never been asked that before. People assumed someone like him didn't need an escape, that his wealth insulated him from stress, but it didn't. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe that's why I'm here. She studied him for a moment, then nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. Well, she said, pushing off the rack, if you keep coming back, maybe you'll figure it out. The thought was more appealing than it should have been. As he left the gym that day, he realized something unsettling. He wasn't just coming back for the workouts. He was coming back for her. Yarrow hadn't realized how much he'd come to anticipate his daily visits to Summit Fitness until the day Calla wasn't at the front desk. He stepped inside, scanning the gym, expecting to see her bright smile greeting him like it had every other time. Instead, a different employee sat at the reception, barely looking up from their computer as they muttered a half-hearted greeting. It was irrational, the way disappointment settled in his chest. He wasn't the kind of man who let things or people affect him so easily, but as he moved toward the weights, his focus wasn't on his workout. It was on the absence of the woman who had somehow become the highlight of his routine. He pushed through his exercises, trying to shake the nagging thought that something felt off without her there. His form was solid, his endurance unwavering, but the usual satisfaction of pushing his limits was missing. Then, just as he was finishing a set, he caught sight of her. She had just walked in, her hair slightly damp as if she had rushed to get here. She wasn't in her usual Summit Fitness polo, but in a casual tank top and leggings, a gym bag slung over her shoulder. She looked distracted, her usual energy dimmed by something. Yarrow didn't hesitate. He crossed the gym, intercepting her before she could disappear into the locker room. "You're late," he said, the words coming out before he could think better of them. Calla blinked, clearly surprised to see him standing in front of her. Then, to his relief, she let out a small laugh. "Didn't realize I was on a schedule." He didn't return the smile. Instead, he studied her, noticing the tension around her eyes. "Everything all right?" She hesitated, then sighed, rolling her shoulders as if trying to shake something off. "Yeah. Just one of those mornings." He waited, giving her space to elaborate, but when she didn't, he motioned toward the nearby equipment. "You working out?" She glanced at the machines, then at him, as if debating something. Finally, she nodded. "Yeah. I could use it." Without another word, he gestured for her to follow him. They moved through a workout together, wordlessly falling into a rhythm. Calla wasn't her usual talkative self, but Yarrow didn't push. He simply kept pace with her, matching her intensity. He could tell she was using the workout as an outlet, pushing herself harder than usual. Eventually, as they both paused to catch their breath, she exhaled sharply. "Ever have one of those days where everything seems to go wrong before you even step out the door?" "More often than I'd like," he admitted. She glanced at him, as if surprised by his answer. "I thought guys like you had assistants to make sure everything in your life ran smoothly." A dry chuckle left him. "You'd be surprised how many things money can't fix." She considered that, then nodded. "Yeah. I get that." For a moment they stood there, silent except for the faint hum of the gym around them. Then Calla stretched her arms over her head, shaking off the last remnants of whatever had been weighing her down. "Thanks," she said, tilting her head toward him. "For not asking too many questions," he shrugged. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." She studied him, something unreadable flickering in her expression. "You're different than I thought you'd be." He raised an eyebrow. "That a good thing?" A small smile touched her lips. "Yeah. I think it is." Something shifted between them in that moment. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't something that could be pinpointed with words, but it was there, undeniable. And Yarrow knew, as he watched her grab her water bottle and flash him one last grateful look before heading toward the locker room, that this wasn't just about a gym anymore. It was about her. Yarrow had never been the type to linger too long in one place. His life was built on constant movement, meetings, deals, decisions that shaped entire industries. But now he found himself looking forward to something entirely unexpected, the time he spent at Summit Fitness, or more accurately, the time he spent with Calla. It wasn't just attraction, though there was plenty of that. It was the way she made things feel real. The way she looked at him like he was just another guy, not someone whose name carried weight in boardrooms, and it was getting harder to ignore. One evening, after the usual intensity of their workouts, Calla leaned against the counter near the juice bar, twisting the cap off a bottle of water. Yarrow stood beside her, stretching out his arms, his muscles still burning from their session. "So," she said, tilting her head slightly, "I was thinking about something today." He exhaled, waiting for her to continue. "You never really talk about what you do." Yarrow studied her for a moment. Most people knew exactly who he was before they even shook his hand. But Calla had never pried, never treated him like a headline or a business decision, and he liked that. "Maybe because I don't want this place to feel like everything else in my life," he admitted. Her expression softened, but she didn't let him off that easily. "That might be true, but it doesn't answer my question." He rolled his shoulders, deciding there was no harm in telling her. "I run a company, investments, acquisitions, a lot of moving pieces." She raised an eyebrow. "That's vague." He let out a short laugh. "It's complicated." Calla took a sip of her water, watching him. "Complicated sounds exhausting." "You have no idea." She hesitated, then set her bottle down. "Is that why you came here?" "To escape all of that?" Yarrow hadn't thought about it in those exact words, but now that she said it, he realized she wasn't wrong. "Maybe," he admitted. A slow smile tugged at her lips. "Well, if you were looking for a place where no one cares how many deals you close, you picked the right gym." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't doubt that." For a moment they stood in comfortable silence, the usual noise of the gym fading into the background. Then Calla shifted, her expression turning more thoughtful. You know, she said, for someone who spends so much time making decisions, you take your time with some things. He glanced at her, intrigued. Like what? She met his gaze, something unreadable in her eyes. Like us? The words settled between them, weighty and undeniable. Yarrow wasn't a man who hesitated. He didn't second-guess himself. But with Calla, things were different. He hadn't wanted to rush, hadn't wanted to turn this into something fleeting. But now, standing here, he realized there was no point in pretending anymore. You're right, he said, voice lower now. I have been holding back. She didn't look away. Why? He could have given her a dozen reasons: his lifestyle, his responsibilities, the way his life was never simple. But none of them mattered. Instead, he stepped closer, closing the space between them. Because I didn't want to mess this up. Calla's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her water bottle. And now, Yarrow didn't answer with words. He reached for her, his hand brushing against her cheek, tilting her face up toward his. And then, finally, he kissed her. It wasn't hesitant, it wasn't careful. It was everything he'd been holding back: weeks of tension, of unspoken feelings, of wanting something more than just stolen moments between workouts. When he pulled back, Calla's eyes searched his, her breath unsteady. That took you long enough. He let out a low chuckle. I'll make up for lost time. And he did. Yarrow had never been a man who second-guessed his decisions. Once he made up his mind, that was it. But as he stood outside Summit Fitness the next evening, staring through the glass doors, he found himself hesitating for the first time in years. Last night had changed everything. The kiss hadn't been a mistake, that much he knew. But the shift between him and Calla was undeniable. He had spent all day thinking about her, feeling something he wasn't used to: anticipation mixed with the sharp edge of uncertainty. Would she regret it? Would she act like nothing had happened? Or worse, would she try to create distance between them? There was only one way to find out. He pushed open the door, stepping inside. The gym hummed with the usual energy: weights clanking, treadmills humming, quiet conversations floating through the air. But his focus zeroed in on one thing: Calla. She was near the free weights, adjusting a client's form, completely unaware of his presence. But as if sensing him, she glanced over her shoulder. Their eyes met, and for a split second, he saw it: something warm, something unguarded. Then, just as quickly, she turned back to her client. That wasn't the reaction he'd been expecting. Yarrow wasn't used to uncertainty. He was used to control, to knowing exactly where things stood. And yet, as he walked toward the dumbbell rack, he realized Calla was the one thing in his life he hadn't figured out yet. Minutes passed, then more. He powered through his workout, pushing himself harder than usual. Still, she didn't come over. No teasing remarks, no easy conversation. She was giving him space, and he hated it. Finally, when she finished with her client and started toward the front desk, he moved. She barely had time to react before he was beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Are we going to talk about last night? Calla kept walking, but he didn't miss the way her fingers gripped the edge of the counter. I wasn't sure you wanted to. That caught him off guard. He came to a stop, forcing her to face him. Why would you think that? She exhaled, finally meeting his gaze. Because I don't know what this is for you, and I don't want to assume anything. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated not with her but with himself for making her doubt. I don't do things I don't mean, Calla. Something flickered in her expression. I know that, but you also don't seem like the kind of guy who lets things get complicated. He didn't, not usually, but she had changed that. It's already complicated, he admitted. And I don't care. That seemed to catch her off guard. You don't. Yarrow stepped closer, lowering his voice. I came back here tonight because I wanted to see you, not because of the gym, not because of the workout. You, her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her hesitation cracking just slightly. I don't want to be something temporary for you. The words hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't thought about it like that, but now that she said it, he understood. Temporary, that was how people saw him. A man who didn't stay in one place, who didn't let people in. But Calla wasn't just anyone. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. You're not. She let out a soft breath, looking up at him with something close to relief. Okay, that was all he needed. Later that night, as they sat in a quiet cafe down the street, talking about everything except work and responsibilities, Yarrow realized something. This wasn't just about attraction. This was something real, something he wasn't willing to walk away from. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like running. The city lights stretched out beyond the restaurant's rooftop terrace, flickering against the darkened sky. A soft breeze wove through the intimate setting, carrying the distant hum of traffic below. Yarrow had chosen this place carefully secluded, elegant, and completely separate from the world they usually occupied. Calla sat across from him, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass, a thoughtful expression playing across her face. She had been quieter tonight, but not in an uncomfortable way. It was as if she were processing something, as though she knew this moment between them meant more than just another dinner. Yarrow leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "You're thinking about something?" She glanced up, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You always notice that." "I notice a lot about you." Her expression softened, her hand lowering to her lap. "It's just, this is different." He tilted his head slightly, waiting for her to continue. "I never thought I'd be sitting here with someone like you, not just because of who you are, but because of how you make me feel." A flicker of something deep and unshakable settled in his chest. He wasn't a man who often reflected on emotions. His life had always been about action, decisions, results. But Calla had changed that. She had made him pause, made him consider things beyond the next deal or business move. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "How do I make you feel?" Her fingers curled slightly against his. "Like I'm standing on the edge of something life-changing." Yarrow tightened his grip, his thumb brushing against her skin. "You are." Her breath hitched, and for a moment the air between them was charged with something undeniable. Then, quietly, she asked, "Are you?" His answer was immediate. Yes, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what he wanted, and she was sitting right in front of him. Calla exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as if she had needed to hear those words. "This isn't just a fleeting thing for you, is it?" He shook his head. "Not even close." A weight seemed to lift from her, and she smiled, this time with certainty. "Good." The conversation shifted naturally after that, flowing into easy laughter and shared stories about things neither of them had discussed before. It wasn't grand declarations or dramatic confessions, it was something quieter, something deeper. As the evening drifted on, Yarrow found himself watching her more than he listened, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke passionately about something. When the waiter cleared their plates, Yarrow leaned back in his chair, fingers absent-mindedly drumming against the table. "I need to ask you something." Calla arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "That sounds serious." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulling out a small velvet box. He hadn't planned on doing this tonight, at least, not exactly like this, but there was no point in waiting. He had never been a man who hesitated when he knew what he wanted. Her breath caught as her eyes flickered to the box. "Yarrow." He stood, stepping around the table, and dropped to one knee beside her chair. Calla's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, but there was no fear, only overwhelming emotion. Yarrow flipped open the box, revealing a ring that sparkled even under the dim rooftop lights. "I don't want to wait. I don't want to spend another day pretending like this isn't the most certain I've ever been about anything." His voice was steady, sure. "I love you, Calla, and I want you to be my wife." Her eyes glistened, her chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. For a moment she didn't speak, and Yarrow felt his pulse hammer with rare uncertainty. Then a breathless laugh escaped her, and she nodded so quickly it was almost frantic. "Yes." Relief crashed through him, followed by something even stronger, joy. He slid the ring onto her finger, then surged forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that sealed everything between them. The restaurant terrace erupted in soft applause from the few other patrons, but Yarrow barely heard it. The only thing that mattered was the way Calla kissed him back, as if she had been waiting for this moment just as much as he had. 6 months later, the ocean stretched endlessly before them, the golden hues of the setting sun casting a glow over the private villa's terrace. Calla stood at the edge, barefoot on the smooth stone, the breeze teasing the hem of her dress. Yarrow wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a slow kiss to her shoulder. "You're staring at the horizon like you're expecting something." She leaned into him, her fingers tracing absent patterns over his hands, just taking it all in. Their wedding had been intimate, a perfect blend of elegance and warmth, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Now they were here on a secluded island retreat where time seemed to slow just for them. Calla turned in his arms, tilting her chin up to look at him. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "The moment I kissed you for the first time, I knew I wasn't letting you go." A soft laugh escaped her, and she rested her forehead against his. "I love you." Yarrow tightened his hold on her, his voice deep with certainty. "And I will love you for the rest of my life." The waves crashed gently below, the sky darkening into endless stars. But for Yarrow and Calla, the world had already disappeared, leaving only the two of them exactly where they were always meant to be.